Hello, welcome to the Chicago Food Justice Summit. My name is Amy Cook. I'm an attorney, and I will be talking today about starting a food business or nonprofit. I'm going to share my screen so I can show you my presentation. Always seems to take a minute there, so here we go. So again, welcome. And I'm Amy, and my firm handles individuals, small businesses, nonprofits. I started an organization called the Food Lawyer Network, along with some colleagues from the Chicago Bar Association Food Law Committee that I am chair of. And we help food businesses and nonprofits place them with either a low cost or pro bono attorney when possible. I also do quite a bit of professional development and educational programming for various organizations. And I'm a former executive director of a nonprofit, a food-based nonprofit, the Farmer Chef Alliance. We're going to talk today about what type of business formations might be right for you, including nonprofit. And we'll talk about a variety of other things as well, including protecting your intellectual property, negotiating contracts and leases if you are going to lease space for your business, and what kind of permits and licensing you may need. First, we'll start with a sole proprietor for your business. That's just if it's you going at it on your own with your business. So you'll be a sole proprietor. So the benefits of that are that they're simple and inexpensive to create. From a tax perspective, you're a single business entity. Your business income and losses are reported on your own federal tax return. However, there are some detriments for doing a sole proprietor as well. The main one is that you're personally liable on all business debt and court judgments. So for instance, your creditors would be able to go after your personal assets, and you don't have that protection that some other business forms might have. So might not be one to consider, although if you have a more straightforward, maybe if you're just starting out, you can consider yourself a sole proprietor. Next one we're going to discuss is going into a partnership with someone. If there are two or more people, you will need to choose partnership or one of these other ones. So you will choose partnership or corporation or LLC if there's more than two people. It's not necessary under the law to have a written partnership agreement, but it is highly recommended. I'll probably say that several times during the course of this conversation here, that you should have things in writing. Your personal liability is similar to a sole proprietor. So this particular type of business structure doesn't give you that protection from liability like some of the other ones that we'll discuss in a moment do. Each partner can legally bind the partnership, and you'll be liable for the actions of the other. So that's something to consider as well. One person can enter into contracts, one person can bind them. So consider that, how trustworthy your partnership is. You should of course go into business with someone who you do definitely trust. And that's again why you should have a written agreement so you know where everybody stands with these. So you can have a couple different types of partnerships. There can be just kind of a general partnership where everybody is contributing equally and can receive benefits equally. You can have something where there's a general partner, which is usually the person managing it on a day-to-day basis, and they have unlimited liability. Or there can be a limited partner, and that person might be something like an investor or someone like that who just contributes and doesn't really want to handle part of the day-to-day, but they will become a limited partner, and that way that limits their liability, and they have a limited role in the management as well. Here's some things that you should include in your partnership agreement. How long it will last. Will it be just ongoing or for a certain period of time? Maybe 5 years or just to kind of accomplish what you need to accomplish. State what the purpose of your business is. Contributions. What is each person contributing to this? It could be money, of course, but it could be property. It could be services. How will the partnership be managed? Also include how you will divide up the profits, losses, what kind of salary people might be receiving. How will you take on a new partner? Resolving disputes. How will you resolve disputes? And then people don't tend to think about wrapping up a business, but it is definitely something to include as well, whether it's just time for that business to end, or it might be bought out by another business. So address that in the partnership agreement as well. Let's talk about corporations. The benefits of a corporation, as many people may know, as opposed to partnership or the sole proprietor, is that there'll be tax benefits and liability benefits for this. You'll limit your liability. So it is a separate legal entity from the individuals who own it. You probably have heard about that decision about corporations are like people now, so that they're considered a separate legal entity. It can be formed by one person. I know sometimes when we hear the word corporation, we think the large major corporations, but there can be a single person corporation where you own all the stock and you are the only employee. It does limit your personal liability, which is great. But I would like to point out it does limit it. And in some cases, and depending on the circumstances, you still could be personally liable for some sort of legal issue. And it offers protection against the activities of your co-owners and your employees, which is also beneficial. Here's some of the benefits of corporations. It allows for the company to grow. It has perpetual life, and it makes changes in ownership easy. Some of the cons for corporations are there's more paperwork. It costs more to start than some other forms of business and can be affected by double taxation. We'll talk about what that is in a moment. You may have heard the terms a C Corp or an S Corp. A C Corp, this just comes from the IRS code where these are described of what a C Corp and S Corp are. The C Corporation is a separate tax-paying entity and must pay corporate federal income tax. And a C Corporation eliminates some of that double taxation. So you're not paying it as the separate entity and as yourself. The tax is paid by the corporation's owners. I would like to point out here that I am not a tax attorney, and I do highly recommend consulting tax attorneys or your CPA when you do have start your business, so that you do fully understand all the tax ramifications of your business. Talk about what an LLC is. Many people probably are familiar with that term, and this is one that many people do choose for when starting a business. It has a lot of nice benefits. It limits your personal and legal responsibility for business debts and court judgments. It can be formed by a single person or by several people working together. If you're forming one along with other people, again, I do definitely recommend having a written operating agreement, and it would cover some of those same things that we discussed in talking about a partnership. And it allows for greater flexibility on sharing profits and losses than a corporation does. They're pretty simple to form as well. Let's talk about nonprofits. I know some people in the audience were probably thinking about starting a food-based nonprofit. There's lots of great reasons to do so, and working in the food area is definitely one that you can find funders and donors for. It's something that people do seem to care quite a bit about, and that's coming from my background as well, coming from a food-based nonprofit, and there's a lot of joy and satisfaction in that. And then some people may be weighing whether their idea is more of a for-profit business or a nonprofit. So for a nonprofit, you're going to file the appropriate paperwork with your state. We're in Chicago and in Illinois. So in Illinois, you're filing it with the Secretary of State office. You also will be filing the articles of incorporation, and that creates the legal entity. To have a nonprofit, you have to have a mission that is serving the public interest. The nonprofit limits the owner's personal liability. And they're separate tax entities, but with more favorable taxation than a for-profit corporation. Sometimes people do kind of mix up what the term nonprofit versus a 501c3 is. What's the difference? Well, a nonprofit is, as we've just discussed in the previous slide, where you would file that with the Secretary of State in your state. But then also you're probably going to want a 501c3 status, and that's separate. That's something you need to get from the IRS. That's a Form 1023. And you'll want that because that is what you'll be able to have to show donors, and also in terms of getting grants. Many grant-making organizations want to fund 501c3s. So you'll want to get that designation for your nonprofit, probably. So as I say, not only filing with the state, but you're going to want to file documentation with the IRS to get your 501c3. And there are certain organizations that can get a 501c3 and certain ones that cannot. So again, check on the IRS website. There's also many websites that will outline to you what you can and can't do for a 501c3. So therefore, religious, charitable, scientific, educational, literary purposes that benefit the public for a 501c3. And as I mentioned before, some grants are only available to organizations that have a 501c3. So in starting your nonprofit, have a mission statement, a well-defined mission statement. That'll help you obtain your 501c3 status. Be specific and have a narrow scope. I did have a client that wanted to do urban agriculture and also had ideas of doing some literacy work as well, which I love both those ideas. Those are kind of two of my favorite passions. So great ideas. They're pretty different though. So it's going to be a little difficult to form one nonprofit that does literacy work and urban ag, unless you can find some way to tie them together. Those might be better being two separate nonprofits. For your board, you'll need a board of directors. Most states do limit personal liability on the board, so you can make sure you tell people that when you're recruiting them. You're going to want a diverse board. And I mean diverse in age, gender, race, geography, skills, and consider having an odd number on your board of directors to avoid ties when you're voting on things. So many smaller nonprofits have somewhere 5, 7, 9 board members. Term limits. Some nonprofits choose to have that and some choose not to. It's up to you. Having a term limit can bring in fresh perspectives, but you also may lose out on valuable board members if you say that they need to go in 2 or 5 years. So that's just something to consider. And that will be addressed in your bylaws. Your bylaws are your rules for how your nonprofit will function. It should lay out how directors will be selected, how you will conduct board meetings, how elections for the board of directors will occur, if you will have an executive director. That would be the person, a staff person who runs the nonprofit. So do keep that in mind, that the executive director, if you have one, you don't have to, but is a staff person, not typically a board of directors person. How you will nominate directors, what officer positions, such as the president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. And you can check with your state's Secretary of State office for what should be included in your bylaws. Let's talk a bit about licenses and permits for food-based businesses. There can be quite a few. So I'm not going to get into too much depth in this because I'm not sure what types of businesses necessarily that people are considering starting. There could be a very broad range. And you will need to look up what will be appropriate for your business or nonprofit if you are operating a nonprofit that is producing food or serving food or something along those lines. So in the city of Chicago, where you're most going to be dealing with is the Business Affairs and Consumer Protection Office. But some of the other ones that you might deal with might be the Department of Public Health or the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. So some of the permits that you may need, depending on your business, and many of these are self-explanatory, but if you're doing special events, say that's like, Taste of Chicago type thing, concessions, maybe you're going to have a little place at a beach or something like that. Perhaps you're going to be part of one of the markets. You'll need to get permission from the city markets. You may have a food truck. You may have a cart. You may have a food store, a retail establishment. Perhaps you're going the route of doing a cottage food operation, which are always great. I love working with cottage food producers. You may be working in a shared kitchen, but you don't necessarily need to be with the cottage food business, but that's a whole other conversation that we can have another time. So there might be a shared kitchen, and you need certain permits and licenses for that. Both the shared kitchen might be able to walk you through that. And again, you can look up Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. And then of course, if you are doing the cottage food business, there are a number of things that you can make in your own home, but of course there's lots of regulations around that. You may need a registration to do cottage food businesses at home. Let's talk about your intellectual property for your business or nonprofit for a while here. Some of the things that would be considered the intellectual property of your business are your business name, which could be the same or different from your domain name on your website. You might have a trademark or service mark in your product. You may have trade secrets. And I'll explain what copyright is a bit too, just because oftentimes people have questions about what the difference between trademarks and copyrights and what does one protect versus the other. A trademark or a service mark is a word or phrase or design that identifies your product or service within the marketplace. Business name and your trademarks can be two different things. They could be the same thing, they could be two different things. So for instance, there's a company called Yum Brands, and that's the name of the company, and it owns KFC and Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. Those are different trademarks and different businesses within Yum Brands. So that can work with your business as well. You could have one business, that's your business name. You could have different products and services under that. Who has the right to use a trademark is the first user of a distinctive name or service gets the right to use it. The more creative your trademark is, the more likely it will be able to be protected for trademark. That's called distinctive marks. So one of the common examples for that would be Apple computers. Apples, the actual fruit, have nothing to do with computers, so it's a more creative, distinctive kind of mark. So for instance, if your name is Brenna and you bake breads and you call it Brenna's Breads, that could be considered on the less protected spectrum of trademarks, which they call ordinary or descriptive terms. So not saying that you can never get a trademark in those type of things, but you will want to be careful with that, is that it might be just considered descriptive. That's your name and you make bread. In order to find out if your trademark is available for use, it's pretty easy to just get that ball rolling yourself without seeking out a trademark attorney, which you may want to do down the road. But you can do an initial search at uspto.gov, and that's the US Patent and Trademark Office. And it's very easy to do. You could also do a domain name search just on the web to see if your ideas have been taken already. You do not need to register your mark with the US Patent and Trademark Office to have protection, but it does registering does give you additional protections and gives you the exclusive right to use the mark. People often ask, what is the difference with the circle R and the TM? You can use the circle R if you have federally registered, and if you have not, or if you're only using it within your state, you can use the TM. How to register your trademark is you file the application online at the Patent and Trademark Office. The fees range a bit for what you're registering. And if you want to register your trademark in different classes, so for instance, if you have a barbecue sauce and you've got the bottled barbecue sauce, but then you also want to do a t-shirt, you want to do a hat, things like that, those would be a different class of trademarks, so you would register them in different classes and they'd be registered separately. Let's talk about trade secrets. That's another way to protect your intellectual property. Trade secret is anything that gives your business a competitive advantage. The business must behave in a way that proves its desire to keep the information secret. You can't just later, once you've been sued, say, oh, but that was our trade secret. Or I don't mean if like you get sued, but if you would want to sue somebody else, if you are saying that someone has stolen your trade secrets, you can't at that moment say that, oh, that was a trade secret. You need to behave in a way that where you've been protecting your trade secret. So this, excuse me, so this may be something like your recipes and the way that you do things within your business. Recipes usually are not protected by other means, such as copyright, but they can be protected by trade secret laws. You might want to have a non-disclosure agreement with employees or contractors you work with. And in this case, you will define what the confidential information is. You will define what's excluded from the non-disclosure agreement, what the obligations of the person receiving the information are. They usually have a time period for keeping the information confidential. We don't want to restrict people too much of being able to go about their business down the road. So it's usually maybe 5 years that they will need to keep your business practices private. And then also include in the agreements what laws will apply. For instance, it will be by the state of Illinois. Perhaps you might want to mediate something like this rather than going to court, which is always a good idea, and whether or not attorney's fees will be included. Let me talk about copyright for a moment. People do have questions about what is copyrightable. So a copyright is an original work of authorship set in a fixed and tangible medium of expression. So what that means is whenever you create something, you do own the copyright to that right away. So if you're taking photos for your business and you want to use those photos on your website or in your social media, in your advertisements, you own the copyright to your photos. You own the copyright to your advertising materials that you write down. You don't need to federally register them. That does, again, give you additional protections in case of a lawsuit. And it's pretty easy to do. But copyright law does protect your creative works the moment that they're fixed in a tangible medium. So as soon as you write them down, as soon as you're saved to a computer hard drive, they are protected by copyright. So again, it covers things like writing and photography and painting. So copyright does not protect recipes. Sometimes people do say like, oh, I'm just going to copyright my recipe. And copyright does not protect, they consider recipes to be kind of a listing, a formulation, and those kind of things are not protected by copyright. But if you do have a particularly creative head note in a recipe, that could be protected by copyright. Let's talk about contracts. Check how we're doing on time. Some contract basics. They don't need to be formal. It can be just an agreement. So I know sometimes people can get a little scared by the term contract and say like, oh, I don't want to make it too lawyery with friends, business acquaintances. You just need to be offering and accepting. Just make sure that everybody understands what they are agreeing to in it and where they stand with it. So put everything in writing. It can be very informal, casual. You can create it yourself or find templates online. I'm going to quickly go through negotiating leases in case your business or nonprofit does want to have an actual establishment, a building, an office space. Make sure the agreements are in writing and signed by both parties, and make sure that people do have the legal authority to sign it. And just make sure you go through each of the elements of your lease. How did they compute the square footage? Are you paying a proportionate share of common areas? What about parking? Here are some other aspects of leases to make sure you're looking over. Your start date, your right to collect damages if you've suffered a loss because it wasn't ready on time. Ask the landlord to have building and safety checks. Have an end date with an option to renew. Make sure increases are included, and if they are they reasonable? And negotiate a cap on rent increases wherever possible. Some other things to consider with leasing is, will the landlord make the improvements or will you? Attach drawings and specifications and specify what you can and cannot take with you. And make sure that the space is ADA compliant. Here are some additional areas to consider in a lease. Utilities, who will create the signage, routine maintenance, cleaning, trash removal, all the kinds of things you're going to want to go through and make sure, is this my responsibility? Is it the landlord's responsibility? Make sure it's all in writing. So tips on negotiating. Everything is negotiable in my opinion, but obviously what you are able to get depends on your bargaining power. Always remain calm when bargaining and negotiating. Keep it all professional. Put concerns and requests for changes in writing and be very specific. Don't threaten to sue, at least right away, as I say. And one of my favorite tips is to blame your lawyer when you're negotiating contracts, even if you don't have one. Just say, my lawyer says I should protect myself with this, or my lawyer says I should do that. So it's a good way to do that. So thank you very much for your attention on this presentation today. Would be very pleased to help anyone get their business or nonprofit started or to help you grow. And I know that CIFPAC has lots of great resources available to you as well. Thanks very much for your time and attention today.